So I'm Jens Christensen. I'm co-founder and the CEO of Jaunt. And if you don't know Jaunt, basically what we do is content for virtual reality, and specifically cinematic virtual reality. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is in this presentation. What you see here is a shot from Paul McCartney's last concert at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. And we recorded that in VR, and you can see up there, this was about a year ago, and up there is one of our cameras, early prototype cameras that we used to record that. And if you want to experience that, you can download that today, this experience, and have it with a headset and actually experience being up on stage with Paul McCartney. So VR has been around for a while in popular culture. Going back to movies like Brainstorm, that's actually a young Christopher Walken wearing a very cool headset. The Matrix came out in '99, obviously about alternate realities. And Ready Player One is a great and interesting book that's now being turned into a movie directed by Steven Spielberg. So it's going to stay in the popular culture for a while. VR is hard to do. It's hard to pull off. Up until recently, it was really confined to really military and research-type applications. This is a headset from the Stanford VR lab from about 5 years ago. It was a $40,000 headset. It was, because of that, it really didn't hit the mainstream. That really changed in 2012 thanks to Oculus. They brought out the DK1 headset. It was priced at $299. It was really technology that made this available to not really the mainstream audience, but to developers. And it inspired developers. And in fact, it inspired us. We got our first DK1 from Craigslist because it was sold out, and we're just blown away by it. And then last year, Google introduced Google Cardboard, which to us is very interesting. And essentially, it's just a piece of cardboard with a couple of lenses. And you basically put in a smartphone, and you can have a great initial VR experience just using a smartphone. And this actually makes an interesting point. The reason VR is happening now and didn't happen 5, 10, or 15 years ago is because of smartphone technology. It's the lightweight, high-resolution screens. It's the inertial motion sensors that are in there. That's really what's enabling VR today. And Google Cardboard sort of proves that you can have a good VR experience with a smartphone that was not designed for VR. So let me talk a little bit about cinematic VR. VR grew up around gaming, and we saw an opportunity to really bring sort of TV or movie experience to VR as opposed to computer-generated animation. And even John Carmack recently said from Oculus, he's the CTO at Oculus and the creator of Doom, said that realistically media is going to be at least half the experience that people are going to be using VR for. And this is coming from really one of the gods of gaming. So what are some of the differences that you see between cinematic VR and gaming VR? First of all, in gaming VR, you'll typically have a tethered headset. And the reason for that is that to drive a real-time game, you're computing every pixel at 90 frames a second. And for that, you really need a big computer with a high-end graphics card, or at the very minimum, a console, like a gaming console, like a PlayStation. And your headset will be tethered to that computer. In cinematic VR, what we do, it's a little different. We do a lot of computation, but we do it ahead of time up in the cloud. And once we're done with that, we've created the VR experience. That VR experience is essentially a video file. And that video file plays, it plays on computers and consoles, but it also plays on your smartphone. So that's one of the distinguishing characteristics, is with cinematic VR, you don't necessarily need a tethered headset. You can have an untethered smartphone experience. The other difference is, it's a little hard to see here on the slide, but if you notice, he's holding a controller. So for a game, you'll typically need some kind of controller to be able to move around. We don't want to require people to have controllers. We want people to be able to have a good experience just with a headset, essentially. And we don't want to require people to go out and buy controllers. So in our opinion, cinematic VR really has a very wide appeal, that it's not just the gaming demographic. It's really anyone that owns a smartphone. It's young and old, it's male and female, so it's a very broad appeal for cinematic VR. And so we believe this is very transformative. And let me talk about some of the areas that cinematic VR is transforming today. It transforms music. So I already gave the example of Paul McCartney. We've done a number of work with other artists, including Jack White and Big Sean. Other companies have recorded U2, for example, in VR. There's a lot of interest in music. And for me, it's very exciting because one of the things about VR is the experiences tend to be relatively short today, 3, 5, 10 minutes. And music is perfect for that because you can establish a really emotional connection with the audience very quickly with music, with songs they know and understand. And we can put you up on stage. You'll feel like you're actually there on stage with big stars. Film is another interesting area. We've done a number of work in the film area, really short experiences. Horror is one of the most interesting ones for VR. You can really get quite scared in VR because you feel transported to these locations. We just recently announced a partnership, actually just yesterday, with the Sundance Institute, where we are instituting a VR residency program at Sundance for VR filmmakers, or for filmmakers who want to go into VR, where they can access the platform and really start creating and exploring what we think is a new medium. One of the challenges in VR that's different from traditional media is you no longer have the 16 by 9 rectangle to operate with. Rather, your canvas is, the full world. So you can imagine, if you're trying to, tell a story in front of the audience, but the audience is actually looking away from where you want them to look, you have a bit of a problem. What do you do? And so people are using different techniques to deal with that. One is to use lighting. So you can make part of the scene dark, and you can make another part of the scene light, and people will naturally gravitate and look to the light. Another thing is you can use audio. So one thing I didn't touch on, but we think is very important, is audio in VR. It needs to be fully 360, so that, for example, if you hear a phone ringing over on your left and you look to your left, the phone better be on your left. It better not be over there on your right, or the experience is just broken. So you can use sound to direct people's attention. You can have a crash over there, and then people will naturally look in that direction. And then another approach you can take, which I think is exciting and interesting, is to say, well, let's use the medium to its fullest. Why have just one thing going on? Maybe you have some action going on in front of the audience, but you have something else going on over here, and then a third thing going on over there. And then people can have sort of individualized or personalized experience. That's something you can only do in VR. You can't do that on a traditional movie or TV screen. Sports is another area. One of the key things about sports with VR is when you put on the headset and you start looking around, you maintain a sense of perspective. That is, as you're looking around, you're building a 3D model in your head of what you're seeing. You don't need to be trained for that. It's just how we're wired. As you look around this room, you have an idea of scale and size and so on. And you get the same thing in VR. So why is that important? Well, for sports, it's fantastic. If I put you courtside at a basketball game, you suddenly realize how tall the players are, how fast they're moving, how athletic they are. That's something that's really lost on a TV screen, but you get that in VR. The other thing is you feel transported. You can look over to your left and you can see a celebrity, maybe Jack Nicholson watching the Lakers game, and you feel like you're right there with them. So we think it has tremendous potential for sports. Travel is another very natural area for VR because you can feel transported. You can, travel to the Himalayas virtually, or downtown Paris, or Dublin, if you will, just feeling like you're there is very powerful. So one thing we did is we recorded some experiences in Australia, and Qantas has made that available in their planes, and with the Samsung Gear VR. And you can actually feel like you're in Australia before you actually get there. Um, News is another fascinating and exciting area. And one of the key things about news is that you get a sense of objectivity. You don't feel that there's somebody directing where you should look. For example, if there's a demonstration going on, sometimes on TV they zoom in on it, but you don't really get a feeling for how big it is or how many people are really there. If we put a VR camera in the middle of a demonstration, you can start looking all around and feel like you're really there. So one thing we did recently, with ABC News, where they used our platform, is they took our camera to Syria and recorded in Damascus, and recorded areas that really are at risk today because of the civil war over there. You can download that today, and you can actually feel like suddenly you're on the rooftop in Damascus looking all around the old city or in a temple. And it's a perspective that we think really humanizes the news. In one scene, you're actually in a marketplace in Syria, and a little boy comes riding a bike by you, and you feel like you're right there, and you can see him going by you. Again, the sense of scale and being there really creates, we think, a new level of empathy for news. And so we're very excited about future pieces going forward. Advertising is also very interesting. There's a lot of interest from brands in bringing the brand experience to VR virtually. We've done some work with North Face, where we've recorded base jumpers jumping off of cliffs, literally in Yosemite and the Moab, and we essentially put the camera, the VR camera, on a drone, and you feel like you're flying over them as they're basically jumping off. It's really quite a powerful experience, and again, it's something you can try today. And so let me talk a little bit about the technology that's required. That's actually an image from the drone, from this piece, the Yosemite and Moab piece, where we mounted the camera on the drone, and you can see the camera mounted there beneath the drone. This was actually the first camera that we built. This is just the top of the camera. It was a 150-pound camera. It was so big that we couldn't really take it out of the office. This was built 2 years ago, and we just recorded ourselves throwing a ball around the office. But even that simple scene was powerful enough that people realized this had great potential. We then started using essentially rigs made with other cameras. So this is an example of our second generation prototype, and these are actually GoPro cameras that are in there that are modified with heat sinks, an external SD card, and external power source. And then just last month, we released the Jaunt 1 camera that we've built from the ground up. So we spent the first 2 years of Jaunt's existence building really this camera. We're very proud of it. It's really the first camera built from the ground up for VR. It consists of 24 modules that record in all directions. You basically take the camera, you put it on stage, or you put it down in a hot spot, and you press record, and it just starts recording all around. It generates a lot of data. One thing about VR is that it's really a big data problem. This camera generates about 3 gigapixels per second. And you basically need to ingest all that data and create the VR experience from that. So there are a lot of technical challenges to overcome. So one of them is really around computational photography. So if you look at what's coming into each module, you can see the individual pictures here. This is from one of our early cameras, and this is a picture of the Golden Gate. And one thing you might be able to notice is the different modules have really quite different color characteristics. If you look at the ground, the ground is lighter or more brown in some cases. You look up at the bridge, you can see distortion. There are a whole number of things. You need to stitch the different images together to really create a compelling panorama. And then you don't do this just once. You need to do this at 60 frames per second, so 60 times a second. And then not only that, you need to do it really for both eyes. So we actually create a different panorama, if you will, for your left eye than your right eye, and this is what gives you a sense of depth or 3D. So there's really a deep technical challenge involved here. So let me just demonstrate a little bit about the pipeline. This is essentially how it works. Is you take the camera out, you do the recording, and we support the Jaunt 1 camera. We also support Nokia's new camera called the Ozo camera. And you basically take the input from that camera and you put it typically onto a laptop, or depending on the setup you have, it could be a different type computer where you can preview what you have been recording. But at some point, you need to upload all of this up into the cloud. It's really in the cloud that the rendering is happening. So we give access to our partners to the cloud so that they can do the rendering themselves. And typically what you do is you'll do some raw rendering first, and you can choose to put that out to your headsets. So we have the ability to distribute to a variety of different headsets, essentially by pushing a button. But what most people do is they want to do some actual editing on it. They may want to insert titles. They may want to do special effects. And so what you can do is you can download from the cloud a high-resolution version of the experience that you can bring into standard tools, something like Final Cut or Premiere or Nuke, etc. And you can then do your standard editing. And that's important for us. We don't want to force people into a whole new set of tools that they're not used to. So being able to use the standard tool that the creative community is used to is important. You can also do sound mixing. So we have a partnership with Dolby Atmos that basically lets you in post-production play sound anywhere in space. And that's perfect for VR, because you can put sound behind you, to the side, etc. And then once you're done with the editing, you re-upload that to the cloud, and then we can, again, distribute out that to a variety of headsets. As I mentioned before, cinematic VR experiences are available today. So here are some examples. You can download these from the Google Play Store, or you can go to the App Store, download the Jaunt app, and view them. They're also available on Oculus and Gear VR. And we'll continue to support as many headset platforms as we can going forward. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.